And we are moving into a different phase of the ministry of Jesus. He has been talking about his role as judge. He has been talking about how when the end will come and those things that we need to be looking for. We need to be looking for his return, and we also need to know how to be obedient in the time between his ascension into heaven and his return back to earth. And last week we saw that final message in chapter 25 and how his return is a certainty and there's going to be accountability. Jesus as shepherd is going to make a determination between the sheep and the goats, and there is going to be a division. There is going to be his people who he will reward with in heaven, and then there will be others who will be rewarded in hell. And now we come to chapter 26, and if you will, open your copy of God's Word and open it to Matthew chapter 26. And now his role as judge is going to be changed a little bit to his role as lamb. Before he will conquer, before he will become king, he has to become the lamb. And so that is what we're going to see over the remaining part of the book of Matthew. We are in the last 48 hours of Jesus' life. These are the last 2 days that he will be alive. These are the last opportunities for people to hear Jesus, for his disciples to be with him. And so this morning I want you to think about these treasures in your life. There's going to be 3 scenes in our text today, and you're going to see 3 examples of different treasures that people highly value. And I want you to ask the question to yourself, what is it that you most highly treasure in your life? What is it that's most important to you in your life? And I want to go ahead and be a spoiler this morning and give you the answer to that question. If Jesus is not your highest priority in your life, then your priorities are wrong. Your treasures are out of perspective with the will of God. And you'll see that this morning. We're going to pick up in verse 1 of chapter 26. And the first thing I want you to see this morning is the treasure of the elite. Notice in verse 1 of chapter 26, Matthew tells us, "And it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, You know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, Not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people." You see right off the bat that Matthew begins to tell us where we are in the life of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus. And he says that after all of these sayings, and I think that he is talking about his completion of the Olivet Discourse, but it also is probably more than that. It is probably the conclusion of all of Jesus' teachings, all of his miracles. His ministry on this earth is coming to an end, and now we find Jesus in quarters in a very personal way with only the 12. His public ministry has come to an end, and after all these things, this is what is going to happen. And then notice there in verse 2, he gives us this headline verse, doesn't he? He tells us exactly what is going to happen to him. There's not going to be any surprise. There's not any surprise on the part of Jesus. Jesus knows exactly why He has come to this earth. He's not searching for His identity. He's not confused about who He is. He's not confused about what God wants Him to do. He says after 2 days, and He's reminding the disciples that 2 days the Passover will take place. These are the last 48 hours. And by the way, the disciples are very clear of when the Passover is. They've anticipated it. That is why they are in Jerusalem to observe this great feast. By the way, the feast of the Passover to the Jews would be one of the paramount feasts. There are many feasts, but this is the feast. Many people would travel from hundreds of miles away annually to come to Jerusalem and celebrate this great feast. The population of Jerusalem is some estimates are that it is quadrupled in size, 4 times its size because of all the visitors that have come into the Passover. And so the disciples are very aware of what the occasion is and why they're there. But Jesus says that for a reason, and He says it because this has something to do with what I have come to do. And now watch this. On the Passover, there you go, Brother Pat. He said, give me a watch this morning, and the first one is right there, isn't it? On the Passover, they would take an innocent lamb, a perfect lamb that would be taken, and its throat would be cut, its life would leave it, the blood would drain from its throat. They would clean this, and they would cook it, and they would roast it, and they would consume the entire lamb. You know the story from Exodus, right? And this would commemorate their exodus from Egypt. And so this Passover was celebrating how God had chosen them, and how God had a special plan for them, and how God had brought them out of the bondage of Egypt and rescued them and put them on the land that He gave them. And now we have Jesus, who is going to be that lamb that is going to rescue His people. Now we know what it meant at the beginning of the book when it says, you will call Him Emmanuel, because He will save His people from their sins. And now Jesus is going to be that lamb, because it says right here, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. Jesus is here for that reason. He didn't come to, I like the old saying, we didn't come to paint. We didn't come to play around. We didn't come to watch. Jesus has come to be a direct participant, and He is giving His life just as the lamb is sacrificed in the Passover. He is going to be that lamb. Well, notice what is going on. Jesus is well aware of what is going to happen to Him. He said, I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to die. In 2 days, I'm going to die. Just like the lamb is killed, I am going to be killed. Now watch what is happening. You know, these events are happening simultaneously, I think. They are happening just right after the other, and look at the speed at which Matthew tells you what's happening. He says, then assembled together. And it seems like the text is picking up a rapid pace here, doesn't it? Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes. There's something, while Jesus is talking about His mission, and while He is devoted to His mission, there's something else going on behind the scenes. It says here that then assembled the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the son-in-law of Annas, and you're going to hear about Annas. He was the former high priest. That was his father-in-law. Annas had some sons also that was a high priest. And this high priest was selected by the Roman government. He would only be permitted to serve under the permission of the Roman government. And so Caiaphas and the Romans are going to work together. They're going to be close enough. The Romans trust Caiaphas to move things along in the country in a way that favors them and doesn't compromise people's loyalties to the Roman government. And so here we are in the palace of Caiaphas. It is probably that Hasmonean palace that is on the west side of the city. It is a very large complex, and probably Annas and his entire family lived there. And this is where this meeting is taking place. And here is the purpose of their meeting. Notice in verse 4, and consulted, this is what they're talking about. That they might take Jesus by subtlety, which means to do it stealthily, to do it carefully, to do it in a way that it doesn't bring a lot of public attention. And he says, and kill him. That is their goal. They want to eliminate this Jesus. Jesus is a threat to them. And so notice what they say here in verse 5. This is their concern, but they said, not on the feast day. Not out here and out in the open. Not when the Passover is taking place and all these people are around. Not on the feast day. Why? Because lest there be an uproar among the people. I don't know if you're seeing it or not, but these elite people, these chief priests and these elders are at the top of the religious food chain. They are the people of prominence. They are the people who are in control of the religious atmosphere, or so they might think they are. Notice this here, what their mindset is that they want to eliminate Jesus. Jesus is a threat to them, and what the elite treasure the most is power. They are not going to have this Jesus steal the show from them. They are going to hold on to it with white knuckles, and they are not going to allow Jesus to encroach upon their power and control over the people. Notice that they are very concerned about the people, aren't they? They want to do this quietly. They want to do this carefully. We've got to be very calculating about this. You know, these people think that they're very smart, and they think that they're going to get away with something. They think that they have a great plan, and that's why they come together. We've got to have a plan to do this. And I'm going to tell you the other thing besides power and control that they most treasure is they most treasure the perception of the people. Notice what it says there in verse 5, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar. They have a belief, they have a conviction. It's not the right conviction, but they have a belief that what they are doing is the right thing to do, and they know it contradicts with what the people want, and they do not care. They are more concerned. Their highest treasure is themselves. It is power, and it is what other people think. Let me stop right here. I've got to make a quick application, and then I'm going to roll on. I hope that we'll be honest with ourselves and admit that sometimes we care more about what people think than what God thinks. I hope that we'll be honest and with ourselves and honest with God, that there's times where we have compromised who we're supposed to be with God at the expense of doing what's wrong. We've done things that are for the wrong motives, and here the motives of the elite are selfish motives. They're self-centered, and they are not worried about the people. Let me tell you this is the last thing I want to say before I move on as far as application, is if you don't care about people, then you're not caring about what Jesus cared about. Jesus is here, and He is going to give His life for the people. Do you see the contrast? Jesus is going to lay down His life for the people. And then behind the scenes, there's a secret meeting taking place. And we don't want the people to know how we really feel. We're going to do this stealthily. Well, the second thing I want you to see here is the treasure of the worshiper. That was a negative example, and this is a positive example. Notice in verses 6 through 13, I'm going to read it quickly. Now, when Jesus was in Bethany, and this is only about 2 miles away from Jerusalem, in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, To what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, Why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For you will have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this, that this woman hath done, be told for a memorial of her. Can you see the scene here? As they're in this home of Simon the leper. And by the way, he was probably used to have leprosy, but now his nickname is, Simon, the guy who used to be the leper. I imagine that Jesus is the one who cleansed his leprosy. He is in the home here, and Martha and Mary and Lazarus, the two sisters and the brother, Jesus has just raised Lazarus from the dead. And you remember the story there in John chapter 11. And now as you move into John chapter 12, you see the same story taking place as it does here. All four Gospels record this. And they're in this house of Simon, and there's a woman, her name is Mary. It is Mary, John tells us her name. John tells us a few more details I'm going to bring out in just a minute. But Mary comes to him as they're reclining at table. And she takes a treasure. And I want you to think about this and what is important to Mary. She takes this most valued treasure. It is estimated that this alabaster of perfume, this container, it's made out of marble. It is probably from India. It is probably worth about a year's wages. Let's say it's worth about $30,000. $30,000 to $40,000. A prized possession. And she takes it as they're sitting around, and she breaks it because that is the only way to open it. And she begins to pour it on top of Jesus' head. And as the oil, it runs down his forehead and his eyebrows and behind his ears and down his neck. It begins to run all over his body. She pours the whole perfume all over Jesus. And you would think, wow, she is worshiping. She is honoring Jesus. But what is said here? Well, his disciples, they saw this, they became angry. They become a little perturbed by this. They begin to, you know what this is called? This is called self-righteousness. Is they begin to see what she's doing and they get a little jealous. And she's honoring Jesus. Well, how dare you do that? I think probably one or two of them was probably thinking, well, I wish I'd done that. But it says the disciples as a group became perturbed, agitated is the word. Mark uses a different word for their emotions, and it can be translated growling. You ever been around someone that you felt like that you could probably just translate that into they growled at me. They were gruff with me. They were talking angrily with me. And that's how they are with her. It is almost like they're going to gang up on her. And watch this. They say, why this waste? And by the way, John says that Judas was the one who was vocal in this. All the Gospels say that it was the disciples, and so we don't exempt them from the feeling. They had the feelings too, but Judas was vocal about it. And it also, John mentions that Judas was the one who was a thief and who would often steal from the money bag that he carried on behalf of Jesus. The thief speaks up. I think that's interesting. It's oftentimes there's an old saying, you throw a rock in a pack of dogs and the one who yelps out is the one who got hit. And it seems like that's the case here, that Judas is the one who gets hit, isn't he? And he hollers out and he says, why this waste? And he's a thief. Well, what does Jesus say about this? Well, their reason is that the ointment might have been sold for much, and we could have given this to the poor. Well, that's a very noble reason, good reason. I'm glad you brought that out, that it could have been given to the poor. What does Jesus say about this? Well, he says, when Jesus understood it, and that means that he knew what was going on in their minds and their hearts, because some of them weren't speaking. Only one that I understand was speaking. But when Jesus understood and perceived what everyone here in the room was thinking, he said unto them, why trouble ye this woman? You know what he's doing here? He's sticking up for her. And he's saying, get off of her. Get off of her back, because what she is doing is a good thing. It can literally be translated a beautiful thing. She's done a beautiful thing for me. And watch what he says. He says, for she hath wrought a good work upon me. And then he says in verse 11, the poor have always been around and they always will be around. So just tend to the poor as you need to tend to the poor. But there is a more pressing matter at hand. It is the fact that I will not always be here. There's 48 hours to go and the clock is ticking, and I will soon be crucified, hanging on a cross. This woman has understood the moment for what it is. Let me ask you a question this morning. Are you understanding the moment? Are you understanding that there is a time to honor Jesus? There is a time to worship Him. There is a time to be obedient to Him and take care of the poor. Jesus doesn't have anything against taking care of the poor. Always take care of the poor. My question to them is why aren't you taking care of the poor then? Take care of the poor. But the more ultimate thing here is honoring Jesus. And that's what she does. Notice here in this verse 12, she says, for in it that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. She has recognized the time. She has seen the importance of the moment in my life. And this anointing here, it is like that of a burial. And it is a precursor for His death. I want you to listen to this. You don't have to turn there, but in Psalm 133, beautiful language here. In Psalm 133, listen to this in verse 1. It's only three verses in this psalm. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Did you hear that? Are you listening? How good and beautiful it is for brethren to dwell in unity. And in this occasion, in Simon's home with Mary and Martha and Lazarus and the 12 and Jesus, there is not unity, is there? There is a woman who is honoring and worshiping Jesus. And then there are others who are grumbling in the background. That's what they do. They grumble in the background. Notice here what the Bible says is how good it is for brethren to dwell in unity. Listen to the next verse. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garment. Doesn't it remind you of the scene here in Mary and Lazarus and Martha's home and Simon's home here, as this oil is running down Jesus' face, and the side of His face is dripping off His chin, running down His chest and going down all the way and covering His body. Notice this last verse. As the dew of Hermon and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion, there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. I want you to get this from this, the treasure of the worshiper. And notice what Jesus says, for verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, and that's the kingdom message. As we preach the gospel, this woman is going to be remembered for her act of honoring Jesus. Let me ask you a point blank question this morning. Are you honoring Jesus? You know, a lot of times we see things in life and we think, well, that's important. I'm going to chase after that and I'm going to pursue that. Well, that's important. That's important. And then someone else comes along and says, well, this is important too. But you're not going to have it. You're not going to have it. Let me tell you what the most important thing for you to pursue in life is to honor Jesus. It wasn't honoring to Jesus what the disciples are doing here. This grumbling and this complaining about the woman who was worshiping Jesus was not honoring to them. But the woman and what she did, did you catch it? She took something that was worth tens of thousands of dollars and she honored Jesus with it. You see that? Money. That's going to lead us into our next little scene here. A year's worth of wages. And what does she do? She pours it out on Jesus. Last thing I want you to see here is the treasure of the insider. And speaking of money, this is what Judas was all about. Notice in 14 through 16, then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests and said unto them, what will you give me? And I will deliver him unto you. And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. The treasure of the insider. You notice what he says here in verse 14, one of the 12. One of those that was chosen by Jesus. His inside circle. One who was called to preach the gospel message. One who was sent out. Back in Matthew chapter 10, they were all sent out, weren't they? They were given spiritual gifts to heal. And one of the 12, you remember in John chapter 6, it was that we learned that Jesus said, I have chosen all of you, and one of you is a devil. Here he is. In Matthew chapter 10, ironically, when that chapter, that mission discourse, when he sent them out, Judas is described as the one who betrayed him. We didn't know really what that meant until now. Notice this is how his betrayal will work. He was called Judas Iscariot, and he goes to the chief priest. He approaches them. And notice what he does in verse 15. This is what he said unto them. What will you give? And here's the key word, the next word. Me. Me. For Judas, it's all about him. Oh, he was the one speaking up on behalf of the poor a while ago, while Jesus was being honored, while she was pouring out a fortune on his head and honoring him and worshiping him. And now his true heart is seen. What will you give me? I want to show you something here. Go back to Zechariah at the end of the Old Testament, Zechariah chapter 11, and I'm going to have to refer to this in a couple of weeks. We're going to come back to it. But in chapter 11, I want to give you a quick summary of it. It is when God was telling Zechariah, I want you to reenact what a good shepherd is and what a bad shepherd is. And his point of this was to show Israel how they have been bad shepherds to his people, and they have abandoned his people. And notice there in verse 4, in 5, it kind of gives you a little bit of a background. It says, thus saith the Lord my God, and that's God talking to Zechariah. Feed the flock of the slaughter, whose possessors, and those are the leaders of Israel are slaying them, and they hold themselves not guilty. These are the ones who are like Caiaphas. These are the ones who are like the chief priest and the elders, and they don't really have the best interest of the people in mind. They have their own best interest. And here Judas is also an example of that. He doesn't have the best interest of the world in mind. He has, what will you give me? And so they hold themselves not guilty, or they think that they are innocent. And they that sell them say, blessed be the Lord, for I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. Now drop down to verse 10. It says, I took my staff, even beauty, and cut it asunder that I might break my covenant, which I had made with all the people. And this is an example. This is not necessarily saying that God will break His covenant, but this is how a bad shepherd will act. A bad shepherd will break his covenant with his people. And notice, and it was broken in that day in verse 11. And so the poor of the flock that waited upon me knew that it was the word of the Lord. They were under conviction and they were hearing this. And they said, you know what? This has come from God. Notice in verse 12. And I said unto them, if you think good, give me my price. And if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. Here Judas is reenacting the prophecy that Zechariah was enacting on behalf of God. And what God was doing here in Zechariah is He was showing them, this is what a bad shepherd does. He sells out his people for 30 pieces of silver. How much is 30 pieces of silver worth? Well, it's not worth a year's wages, I'll tell you that. The perfume that was poured out on his head, worth about a year's wages, a pretty good amount of money. And the 30 pieces of silver, you can define it back in the Old Testament as the price of a slave to be replaced. That's how much it was. It was worth anywhere from 1 to 4 months. There's a lot of discussion about that, but it's still, it's a little bit of money. Let's say it's worth anywhere from $1,500 in today's wages to $4,000 or $5,000. Nice little amount of money. About the price of a person if you were going to buy a slave. But it pales in comparison to what the treasure of the woman had and also the value of Jesus. Judas didn't think much of Jesus. Judas just thought, you know, I don't know where this is going. He's talking about being crucified. I think I'm done. And what's important to me? I'm going to get something out of this. He says, what will you give me? And I will deliver him unto you. And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time on, he sought opportunity to betray him. I want to leave this with you as we come to a close. Is this insider, this person who was close to Jesus, really had no value for Jesus. He was close to Him. He saw Jesus' miracles. He saw the power of God happening all around him, yet he still remained firm. Oh, he was dedicated, wasn't he? He remained firm in this. Me is more important than anything else. Judas loved himself. Judas didn't love Jesus. The woman, she loved Jesus. She gave everything, pretty much everything she had. She says, you know what? It's worth it for Jesus. The chief priests, they didn't love Jesus. They wanted to kill Jesus. And they would rather hold on to power. That was their treasure. The treasure of Mary was that she was a worshiper. And she wanted to honor Jesus in all of her life. And this treasure of the insider, Judas, it was all about him. Judas couldn't see anything other than what was good for him. He just didn't see it. I want to close with this. The most treasured thing in your life has to be Jesus. It has to be. There's a lot of people that are not giving that the attention and the thought that they need to give it. It's clear. It's clear in your life. You say, well, I love Jesus, but it's not evident in your life. You can hear it in the things that you say. You can hear it in the places that you go, the priorities that you have. Honoring Jesus. Are you honoring Jesus? Is He highest priority in your life? As our musicians come, I want you to ponder that question and consider it. As we sing a song of invitation, let's all stand. And I want us to bow our heads and I want us to pray before we sing this song. Father in heaven, I ask you, Lord, to help us to be honest with ourselves and honest